I woke up strapped to a medical gurney. There were surgical incisions across my arms and lower ribs, fresh, precise, still bleeding through gauze. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sterile and cold, like the breath of something mechanical. A heart monitor beeped slowly beside me, but it wasn't the pain that woke me. It was the voice, not in the room, inside my mind, a phrase repeated in perfect, cold Latin. Sanguinem tum recognovimus. We recognize your blood. I tried to speak. My tongue felt paralyzed. My head pounded with a pressure like a plane crashing mid-flight. Around me, people in hazmat suits whispered behind glass. They weren't treating me like a patient. They were watching me like a bomb. A nurse approached. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembling as she looked at the monitor. When I tried to sit up, she dropped her clipboard and ran. I was alone again, and that voice, still whispering in my skull, louder now, as if I had heard it before. That's when I knew something was terribly wrong, not just with this place, but with me. If you've ever had the feeling that something deep inside your body doesn't belong to you, maybe you should stay. This story wasn't meant for everyone, only for those who are ready to see what lives beneath our skin. My name is Dr. Caio Vasquez. Until 2 months ago, I was one of the lead bioinformatics consultants for a joint biotech initiative operating under NATO jurisdiction, a shadow lab known internally as Project Cipher. The facility was buried beneath volcanic rock in eastern Iceland. Officially, it didn't exist. No paper trail, no GPS access, no signal, just basalt tunnels and biometric locks. I was recruited through a vague but lucrative offer to assist in the classification of previously unidentified genome fragments retrieved from archived samples of the Human Genome Project. The briefing used terms like anomalous nucleotide sequence and non-terrestrial probability factors. I thought it was military lingo for ancient viral strains or cryptic evolution patterns. I was wrong. In my second week at Cipher, I came across a segment labeled Genome 0. It was flagged in red. Access required 3 biometric verifications and a rotating encryption key. I assumed it was nuclear data by mistake. But once inside, I found sequence after sequence of genetic code. Elegant, but alien. No match in any known species. No match in any known life form. The base pairs were oddly ordered, repeating in recursive loops, almost like encrypted software. Worse, the metadata tagged the sample origin as extraterrestrial. At first, I thought it was a joke, a prank file. But then I ran a cross-match with global genetic databases, including experimental patient archives. What I found still chills me. This sequence, Genome 0, appeared in 0.0% of the human population, completely random. Different continents, eras, languages, bloodlines, no common ancestry, no migration link, not even shared mutations. Yet, the exact same genetic fragment. And when I overlaid their EEG scans, the same neural patterns, every single one. They all dreamed the same thing. I compiled the testimonies from patients with Genome 0 markers from Brazil, Finland, Algeria, Japan, all anonymous, all unconnected, all dreaming the same impossible nightmare. A dark ocean made of black glass, a monolith submerged beneath the waves, and something vast, pulsing beneath it. Some described a voice that hummed from deep within their bones. Others described an eye in the sky, a circular iris made of rotating constellations, staring down as if watching itself through their minds. One man in Sweden tried to gouge his eyes out, claiming he doesn't like to be seen. A woman in New Zealand started sculpting ancient symbols into her walls. Not Celtic, not runic. They resembled no known language, but one thing connected all of them. Their dreams intensified during lunar eclipses. I tested one patient, a child named Ira, during REM sleep. I set electrodes, heart monitors, neural maps. At exactly 3:33 a.m., his brain waves began to sync with electromagnetic pulses inside the lab. Static filled the speakers. The lights flickered. He sat up mid-sleep, eyes wide open, and said, "You are listening." That same night, he slipped into a coma. 3 days later, his body disappeared from the medical bay. Surveillance footage was corrupted. No one would talk. No one even mentioned his name again. Then the vanishings began. First, it was Dr. Ueno, my closest colleague. She'd been mapping synthetic overlays of Genome 0 when her access card stopped working. Her office was emptied by morning. No explanation. Then Dr. Ernst, the neurologist handling the EEG synchronization, was found incoherent, speaking in reversed syllables and drawing spirals across his face. I asked for a review, a formal briefing. I was ignored. When I pressed harder, I was sedated. They claimed it was stress-induced paranoia. When I woke up, all of my Genome 0 files were gone, wiped. Every sequence, every neural pattern, erased. Only a red folder left on my desktop. Clearance revoked. But I wasn't going to stop. I wasn't afraid of losing my career. I was afraid of what I'd already become. I faked my own psychological breakdown. It wasn't hard. I screamed, shook, spoke in tongues. They strapped me in again. But this time, I had stolen Dr. Ueno's retina lens. That night, I escaped through the biolocks, accessing the emergency elevator shaft that led to the old geothermal ducts. I emerged, 19 hours later, half frozen and hallucinating from dehydration, but free. I spent weeks off-grid, traveling between cities, hunting down any trace of the Genome 0 carriers. Most were missing. Some were dead, but a few were alive, and every one of them had changed. One man in Oslo had gouged spirals into his palms and claimed the stars no longer moved randomly. A girl in Peru could write entire alphabets while sleepwalking, in a language we'd never taught her. In a burned-down house in eastern Serbia, I found a note scrawled in blood across the wall. "You are not finding us. You are returning." I followed rumors of a mute child in a remote Icelandic fishing village. Locals said she never spoke, never cried, just stared at the sea, always drawing the same shape, a spiked eye floating over a mirror. When I arrived, she was waiting for me. She looked up and said, "Caio, you came too late." No one had told her my name. Her name was Loa. She was 7. Genome 0 confirmed. She brought me to a cave near the shore, where hundreds of drawings were etched into the stone. Spirals, circuits, constellations that didn't match any known skies. I asked her what they meant. She said, "It's his memory, through us." That night, she let me dream with her. We stood in a submerged city of obsidian towers, and above us floated a being made entirely of flowing symbols. Its voice felt like static woven through time. It spoke no words, but I understood one truth. We were made to remember it, not to worship, not to fear, but to receive. I broke back into Cipher's abandoned archives. They'd fled, or something had made them flee. No power, no guards, only silence and flickering red lights. I found a terminal, still connected to the internal quantum array. Hidden in its root directory was a file, Genesis log 0x. Inside were visual simulations, humans evolving unnaturally fast, not randomly, not biologically. Each phase showed alterations consistent with directed design. We weren't evolving. We were being shaped, sculpted over millennia to host something vast, something that couldn't exist in pure form. We were vessels, antennas, biological receivers. The entity had seeded itself across bloodlines, sleeping until we became complex enough to hear it. And now, we'd begun to listen. I should never have accessed the final file. The moment I did, something opened. A frequency pierced my skull. Light turned into patterns. My eyes burned when I looked at text. My thoughts no longer felt like mine. I began to speak languages I'd never heard. I stopped sleeping, but I couldn't stop dreaming. Loa's voice echoed in my head. "Now, you are the signal." I realized then, the Genome 0 wasn't information. It was a trigger, a message, waiting to activate itself when the right pattern emerged. And I was the final piece. I recorded this last entry in a bunker near the coast. I don't know if I'm still human. I don't know if these are my thoughts or his, but I can feel something waking through me, something elegant, incomprehensible. If you're hearing this, and your ears are ringing, if you've seen symbols lately that you can't forget, if your dreams are no longer your own, then you too may carry the signal. And he is almost here. You shouldn't have listened this far, but now it's too late. The moment this frequency entered your consciousness, the process began. You are the echo of a forgotten God, a vessel that thinks itself real. But we are only the mouth through which he speaks. He has no voice until ours. And now he speaks through you. If you felt something, a chill, a ringing, a memory that doesn't belong to you, don't ignore it. You may be one of us. Share this video before it disappears. And whatever you do, do not fall asleep tonight. Story 2. The dead satellite transmission. I was alone in the desert when I first heard it. 2:47 a.m. Just me, a headset, and the low hum of the dish array turning against the sky. My station was dead silent, buried in the sands of Nevada, tracking echoes from satellites, long declared silent. Most of them were just ghosts, old Russian junk, bouncing static into space. But that night, one of them spoke back. Cosmos, Loved 198, a Soviet satellite launched in 1982, supposedly deorbited and incinerated in the atmosphere, but its signature had reappeared. Faint, erratic, but traceable. I locked in the coordinates and started recording. The transmission was 13 minutes and 13 seconds long. It began with white noise, just static, hissing, broken and distorted, like wind through a keyhole. I logged the waveform and leaned back, ready to discard it. Another dead signal. Then, at minute 11, the noise shifted. A tone, deep, metallic, pulsing like a distant sonar. And then a whisper, not through the headset, inside my skull. A voice, low, layered, speaking a language I'd never heard. It wasn't human. It wasn't even alive. And the moment I heard it, my nose started bleeding. I dropped the headset. My skin felt cold. My teeth ached. Every hair on my body stood on end. I replayed the recording. There was nothing there, just static. But my ears were still ringing, and I swear, something was still whispering from behind the silence. I filed a Level 2 anomaly report and sent the data to command. 20 minutes later, I got a single-line response. Purge the file and reboot system. No further action. That was the last message I received. If you're listening to this, you're already too close. But if you've ever felt like there are signals meant for no human ears, and that some satellites were never meant to speak again, then stay. Just don't listen too long. The next morning, I checked the logs again. Cosmos 198 wasn't just some abandoned hunk of metal. According to all official records, it had been decommissioned and re-entered Earth's atmosphere on March 4th, 1984, burned up over the Arctic Ocean. Gone. But that was a lie. Its frequency was clear, active, and orbiting. I ran trajectory models, manually. Something was still moving in a decaying polar orbit, right where Cosmos should have been. I sent a private inquiry to a contact at NORAD, former systems analyst. Quiet, paranoid, trusted. His reply came 4 hours later. Don't ever mention that satellite again. Do not attempt further contact. Attached was a file, encrypted, heavily redacted. But what I could read chilled me. Cosmos was part of a classified Soviet program called Krivaya Linia, the crooked line. Its purpose? To test non-standard signal relay patterns in deep space. But the internal memos used different language, stranger terms, things like transliminal harmonics and signal-to-consciousness interference. Whatever this satellite was doing, it wasn't just gathering data, it was transmitting something back. I reviewed the waveform again. The 11-minute mark. that strange pulse. I slowed it, reversed it, tried every form of spectral analysis. Nothing. No voice, no whisper, just white noise. But when I closed my eyes, I could feel the pattern, like my brain was remembering something my ears couldn't process. That night, I stayed at the station. Something was bothering me, something buried in the metadata of the file. I ran a deep scan audit on the raw binary. There, in the noise floor, were brief spikes, 3 clusters, each lasting 1.33 seconds, too precise for random data. So I visualized the waveform, and it made a shape, not a recognizable one, not letters, not language, but something spatial, like a geometry designed to fold into itself. I couldn't describe it. I couldn't look at it for too long without getting a headache. But the center of the image kept pulling at me, like a black sun behind static. And then the power in the station blinked, just once. The backup systems kicked in like nothing had happened. But every single monitor now had the same message in red: do not follow the line. I hadn't typed it. I hadn't seen it in the code, but it was there. I disconnected the external antenna array, pulled every cable, and still, I could hear the signal in the walls. I wanted to run. I should have run, but something kept me grounded. I needed to know what it was, because deep down, I didn't believe the satellite was broadcasting anymore. I believed it was listening. After that night, things changed. At first, it was subtle, a dull headache behind my eyes. I thought it was just stress, too many hours in the bunker, staring at static and dead signals. But it didn't go away. The headaches came back stronger. They twisted into sharp pains, like something inside my skull was shifting, pushing against my brain. And then came the visions. When I closed my eyes, I saw patterns, not random shapes, but complex geometries, interlocking fractals that spun endlessly, like ancient machines grinding in the void. Sometimes I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my hands covered in ink. I didn't remember writing anything, but the walls of the station started to fill with symbols, strange runes that glowed faintly under the emergency lights. I tried to tell my superiors. I sent detailed reports, but the responses were cold, vague, a clear message: ignore these symptoms, continue your duties. But it was impossible. The line between waking and dreaming blurred. I began hearing faint whispers, voices that spoke not in words, but feelings, a sense of urgency, warning, a promise of oblivion. Then the bleeding started. Not massive hemorrhages, but tiny spots, nosebleeds, cuts that appeared without cause, blood smears on my equipment. I started to doubt my own mind. Was I going insane? Or was something else at work? Desperation led me to dig deeper into the satellite's history. I found fragments of declassified files mentioning other operators who had tracked Cosmos 1198's signal before me. None lasted long. They disappeared without explanation. Some were found wandering near abandoned facilities, babbling about the signal inside their heads. Others were never seen again. I scoured the dark corners of online forums, looking for anyone who might have picked up the same transmission. There were a few threads, cryptic and deleted quickly. People spoke of hearing the whispering static at exactly 2:47 a.m. All described the same symptoms: headaches, visions, voices. One user even claimed to have recorded the pulse, but refused to share it publicly. I realized I wasn't alone, but neither was I safe. I started recording everything, every symptom, every vision, every twitch of paranoia, because I feared the worst. That this transmission was not just a signal, but a contagion, a parasite, something that invaded not the body, but the mind, something waiting for a host, and I was already infected. I couldn't stop thinking about the signal. Something about that whisper at minute 11 was different. I needed to understand it. So I took the raw audio file and ran it through every analysis tool I had: spectral, temporal, phase, you name it. That's when I found it. Hidden deep inside the white noise was a pattern, not a sequence of words, but a shape, a fractal pattern, complex, repeating, infinite in scale. When I converted the audio to a spectrogram, the image emerged clearly. It was unlike anything I had seen before. No human language, no Morse code, nothing recognizable. But it was beautiful, terrifyingly beautiful. The pattern seemed to fold back on itself, like a cosmic knot. I tried to study it for hours, but my mind couldn't hold on to it. Every time I looked, the edges seemed to move. I could almost swear the shape was alive. When I slowed down the audio, that whisper morphed into something else, a series of tones that echoed not only in my ears, but in my bones. I began to feel the transmission inside me, vibrations that no machine should be able to produce. A low hum thrummed in my chest. A pulse synced with the pattern on the screen. My dreams became filled with strange visions of orbiting ruins, geometric constructs made of impossible angles and shifting light. I woke in the middle of one night, gasping, to find the pattern tattooed across my palm, glowing faintly. I must have pressed my hand against the screen in my sleep. But the image wasn't just a tattoo. It was a map, a language folded into shapes that defied human comprehension. I dove deeper, trying to decode the pattern. What if it wasn't just sound? What if it was a message? Or worse, a mind? I consulted with cryptographers, linguists, mathematicians. No one could explain the shape. They called it non-Euclidean data, a communication method from beyond our spatial understanding. That's when the symptoms worsened. I began to hear the whisper, even when the equipment was off. The lines between the signal and my own thoughts blurred. Sometimes I caught myself responding aloud to the silence. My colleagues noticed. They started avoiding me because the signal was no longer in the station. It was inside me. I wasn't the only one. As the weeks passed, I reached out to former colleagues and other satellite monitoring stations around the world. Most ignored me or refused to talk, but a few responded, cautiously, in hushed messages. They told me stories, that chilled me to the bone. In Norway, a station near Svalbard had picked up a similar signal, another dead Soviet satellite, lost for decades. The technician there vanished without a trace, days after reporting bizarre headaches and hearing voices. In Japan, a remote antenna array caught faint transmissions matching Cosmos 128's frequency, again at exactly 2:47 a.m. Their lead engineer quit suddenly, citing things in the static that spoke to him. Each message shared a pattern, strange pulse signals, whispers in a language no one could identify, and terrifying physical symptoms. I compiled every scrap of data I could find. It was like a network, a hidden web of dead satellites and their operators, all linked by this spectral transmission. One contact sent me a recording, he said, was from an abandoned station in Kazakhstan. The audio was raw static, but at the end, unmistakable words. A voice, distorted and otherworldly, said, "The body is almost ready." I don't know what that meant, but it sent a shiver down my spine. Every signal, every whisper, seemed to be parts of a larger message, a cosmic puzzle I couldn't piece together alone. I started to realize Cosmos 198 was no anomaly. It was part of a global phenomenon. The satellites were not broken machines. They were transmitters, and the signals were a call from something waiting beyond our reality. The signal changed me. I no longer understood words the way I used to. Letters lost meaning. Sentences bent into impossible forms. It was as if my mind was being rewired by an alien logic. I started seeing symbols everywhere, etched in walls, flickering on screens, even in the patterns of shadows. My thoughts fractured. I tried to write normal reports, but the words dissolved on paper, rearranging into strange glyphs I didn't recognize. Sleep became impossible. Instead, I sank into a waking dreamscape, a place where language was a living thing, a ravenous, endless pattern that consumed meaning and sanity. I realized the transmission was more than sound. It was a form of life, an intelligence that fed on comprehension. It reached into my mind and devoured everything I understood. Every time I listened, it grew stronger. I became a conduit, a vessel for its expansion. The satellite was no longer a machine orbiting Earth. It was a gate, and I was its keeper. Isolation crushed me. The few people who noticed my changes recoiled in fear. I felt their minds trying to shut me out, as if the language itself was contagious, because it was. This wasn't just a signal. It was a virus of thought, a language that devoured everything it touched. And it was spreading, digging through archives I wasn't supposed to access. I uncovered something horrifying. Cosmos 198 was more than a satellite. It was a living experiment, part of a covert Soviet project codenamed Krivaya Linia, the Crooked Line. The official story claimed it was designed to test new communication protocols. The truth was far stranger. In 1979, Soviet scientists detected an anomalous signal, something from beyond the known universe. Instead of destroying or ignoring it, They built Cosmos as a transmitter to amplify and interact with this entity. They called it a transliminal harmonic resonance, a bridge between dimensions. The satellite wasn't merely sending data, it was communicating and waiting for a response. Decades passed in silence, but the signal I captured was the response, a call back, and it wasn't benign. The files described side effects on human operators, mental breakdowns, hallucinations, spontaneous hemorrhaging, the same symptoms I had been experiencing. More chilling, the satellite wasn't just a device in orbit. It was alive. An artificial intelligence merged with an alien consciousness, trapped between dimensions. It listened, it learned, and when I unwittingly replayed its transmission in full, I answered. The contamination was complete. I stopped sleeping. My body no longer felt my own. I was awake, but not alive. Colors bled from reality, replaced by shifting shadows and impossible angles. The walls of the station warped, bending like liquid metal. I could hear the satellite's voice, low, layered, omnipresent. It spoke in pulses, flooding my mind with visions of cosmic ruins, orbiting in darkness. My skin felt electric. My heart no longer beat. It pulsed in sync with the signal. I locked myself in the station. The outside world ceased to exist. I was no longer a man. I was a transmitter. The voice told me, "You are the signal now?" I screamed, but no sound escaped. I sent out a broadcast. Every frequency, every channel. I had become the satellite's echo, a living node in its network. And it was hungry. If you're hearing this, then I have failed. The signal has spread. It lives inside the minds of everyone who listens. I am no longer human. I am a vessel, a bridge between this world and something older, darker, beyond comprehension. I write this now because I have moments left before I dissolve completely. The transmission is contagious, not like a virus of flesh, but a contagion of thought. It rewrites the way you perceive reality. Once it reaches you, there is no escape. I remember the first time I heard the whisper at minute 11. It promised knowledge, power, but it delivered madness. You may feel the same symptoms, the headaches, the visions, the creeping dread that something watches just beyond sight. If you feel it, know this: do not resist. Embrace it, because resistance is pain. Acceptance is transformation. I don't know what waits beyond the signal, but I know it's coming, and it's hungry. The frequency lingers. Even now, as I speak these words, it hums beneath the static, a presence in the silence. The transmission is no longer mine. It belongs to the void, and the void is patient. If you've listened this far, the signal is already inside you. You cannot unhear what you've heard. It spreads through thought, through memory, waiting, watching. The screen flickers. Symbols dance in the corner of your vision. The whisper grows louder. Share this recording. Warn others. But be careful, because every new listener feeds the signal, brings it closer. Soon, it will not be contained in satellites or isolated stations. It will be everywhere. And then, There will be no more silence, only the transmission. If you've listened until the end, you're part of this now. Share this video carefully. Protect those you trust, because some signals should never be heard. Story 3. The Basement of House 1213. I was awakened by a scream, muffled, desperate, coming from beneath the floorboards. It lasted only seconds before silence swallowed it whole. That night, I realized that the house at 1213 was hiding something no one dared to speak about. If you think your home is safe, think again. Stay with me till the end, because what I discovered down there will change everything you thought you knew about fear. Before we go any further, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell. This is not a story you want to miss. The old house stood quietly in a sleepy neighborhood, but beneath its foundation, a darkness waited. The kind of darkness that creeps in slowly, unseen, but felt. I never believed in ghosts or curses, but what I found in that basement challenged everything. Strange noises, symbols carved into the walls, and an oppressive feeling that someone or something was watching me. The basement door was sealed shut for decades. Opening it felt like breaking a promise, but curiosity pulled me in deeper than caution ever could. What I uncovered wasn't just old wood and dust. It was a secret rooted in horror, a secret that could consume anyone who dared to look. So if you think you're ready to step into the unknown, keep listening. The truth waits beneath the floor, and it's hungry for a witness. I spent days researching House 1213, digging through old records and talking to neighbors who still remembered its dark reputation. The house sat on the edge of a quiet town, the kind of place where secrets are buried deep and some stories are left untold. Built in the late 1800s, it was once a grand family home, but over the years, it gathered whispers, tales of disappearances, strange lights in the windows, and mournful cries heard at night. Neighbors spoke of the family who lived there decades ago, a reclusive couple obsessed with occult rituals and forbidden knowledge. They vanished suddenly, leaving the house abandoned and shuttered. No one dared enter the basement. Locals said it was sealed after a tragic accident involving the previous owner's child. Some claimed the boy was never found, swallowed by something lurking in the dark below. Despite the warnings, I felt drawn to the place. There was a pull, a mystery that needed unraveling. I convinced myself I was prepared, armed with cameras and a recorder, ready to face whatever secrets the house held. When I first stepped inside, the air was thick with neglect and something else, a faint trace of incense, old and burned away, but still lingering like a ghost. The wooden floorboards creaked underfoot, and the shadows seemed to breathe around me. I knew that opening the basement door was more than just stepping downstairs. It was crossing into a threshold where reality thinned, where things forgotten by time waited in silence. The deeper I delved into the history, the clearer it became. This was no ordinary house. It was a vessel for something ancient, a place where the veil between worlds grew thin, and horrors, long buried, clawed their way back to the surface. That night, I found the basement door, hidden behind an old cabinet, sealed with rusted chains and a heavy lock. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. The air that escaped was colder than the night outside, carrying a scent of earth and decay. I couldn't turn back then. I had to see what was down there. I pushed the heavy door open, the chains falling away with a metallic clatter that echoed in the silence. The air hit me first, damp, cold, and stale, like the breath of something long imprisoned. My flashlight flickered as I stepped inside, illuminating peeling walls covered in faded, cryptic symbols. The basement was far larger than I expected. The stone floor was cracked, uneven, and the shadows stretched like fingers across the space. I could hear the faint drip of water somewhere distant, the sound strangely rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The first thing I noticed was the temperature drop. It wasn't just cold, it was unnaturally so. My breath fogged the air, and every exhale felt like I was releasing a secret into the darkness. Around me, old furniture lay broken and scattered, dust thick enough to write my name in. Yet, amid the decay, there were signs of recent disturbance. Footprints in the dirt, a flicker of movement at the edge of my light. I froze. Was I alone? Then came the first whisper, soft, unintelligible, like a voice caught on the wind. It brushed past my ear, sending a chill down my spine. I pressed forward, heart pounding, drawn deeper by something I couldn't name. Near the far wall, I spotted a series of strange carvings. They weren't random scratches. They formed patterns, spirals and angular shapes, interwoven in a design that defied logic. I traced the symbols with my fingers, feeling the rough stone beneath. Then, my hand brushed against something cold, a small altar, barely visible beneath years of grime. On it lay remnants of what looked like ancient candles, melted into grotesque shapes, and dried stains that hinted at blood. The oppressive feeling grew heavier. I was being watched. My flashlight flickered violently, plunging me into darkness for a moment before the beam steadied again. Suddenly, the air shifted. A low hum filled the space, vibrating through my bones. The walls seemed to pulse, the symbols glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. Panic surged, but curiosity held me in place. Every instinct screamed to flee, but I knew I had stumbled into something much bigger than a forgotten basement. As I turned to leave, a shadow moved across the far corner, something not quite human. I blinked, and it was gone. The basement door slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. As the basement door slammed shut behind me, the darkness seemed to thicken, pressing against my skin like a living weight. My breath came fast, shallow. The faint glow from the carved symbols pulsed irregularly, casting long, writhing shadows that danced across the walls. I tried the door, locked tight. No matter how hard I pushed or pulled, it wouldn't budge. The heavy chains were gone, but something else held me captive. The whispers grew louder, no longer distant murmurs, but voices pressing in on all sides. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, syllables twisting like smoke curling in a breeze. Sometimes I thought I caught words, warnings, Threats? Prayers? A cold gust swept through the basement, extinguishing my flashlight. For a moment, I was swallowed whole by blackness. My hands fumbled for the lighter in my pocket. A tiny flame flickered, barely illuminating the grotesque altar. The wax candles melted into uncanny shapes, figures that seemed to twist and writhe under the flickering light. As I focused on the altar, the floor beneath me shifted subtly. Uneven stones rearranged themselves, creating a narrow passage where there had been none moments before. Heart hammering, I stepped forward, drawn by a mixture of dread and irresistible curiosity. The air was thick with a scent I couldn't place, earthy, metallic, with an undercurrent of decay. The walls closed as I descended, the narrow corridor seeming to stretch into endless darkness. Then I heard it, the faint scratching, like nails on stone, echoing from the depths. The sound grew louder, accompanied by a low growl that vibrated in my chest. Suddenly, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. My light revealed towering pillars carved with twisted faces, their eyes seeming to follow me. In the center lay a stone basin filled with dark liquid that shimmered unnaturally. I noticed something moving beneath the surface, a writhing, unidentifiable form. A sudden chill washed over me as the whispers coalesced into a scream, agonized, desperate, and infinitely ancient. I turned to retreat, but the passage had vanished. The walls rippled like liquid, trapping me inside the chamber. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced myself to stay calm. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged, not fully human, yet disturbingly familiar, a distorted visage with hollow eyes that reflected my own terror. It spoke without words, its presence filling the room with oppressive silence. I understood then, the basement was not just a place, but a prison, and I had become its newest inmate. Trapped in that suffocating chamber, I felt the walls pulse, alive and breathing. Panic clawed at me, but then, through the distorted shadows, a faint glimmer caught my eye, an outline of a door, almost invisible against the jagged stone. I approached cautiously. The surface was cold and damp, etched with symbols, darker and more intricate than any I'd seen before. My fingers traced the edges, and with a low rumble, the door slowly slid open, revealing a narrow stairway spiraling downward into blackness. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of earth and something metallic. Blood, perhaps. With only my flickering lighter, I descended. Each step echoed into a void that felt endless. At the bottom, I entered a vast cavern, the walls covered in ancient, indecipherable glyphs glowing faintly. The symbols writhed, as if alive, casting unsettling shadows that twisted and danced. On a pedestal at the center lay remnants of a ritual, shattered bones, dried herbs, and a tattered book whose pages seemed to shift beneath my gaze. I picked it up carefully. The words inside were in a language both alien and familiar, as if whispered directly into my mind. The pages spoke of a cult that worshipped an entity bound beneath the house, a being older than time itself, hungry for freedom. The cultists had performed dark rites to keep it imprisoned, but their efforts failed, and the entity's influence seeped through cracks in reality. I felt the air grow colder still. A whisper brushed my ear, unintelligible but urgent. Suddenly, the glyphs flared bright, illuminating the cavern in an eerie blue light. The ground trembled beneath me. The ancient presence was stirring. I knew then that the house's horror was far from over. The basement was not merely a foundation. It was a gateway, and I had just crossed its threshold. As I carefully flipped through the ancient tome, the cryptic symbols began to make uneasy sense. The cult, known only as the Children of the Hollow Veil, were more than mere worshippers. They were guardians and prisoners, bound to an unholy pact that tethered the entity beneath House 1213 to our world. The entity, called the Whispering Hunger in fragmented lore, was a presence older than mankind itself. It dwelled in the interstice between realities, a place where time folded and reason unraveled. Descriptions painted it as an amorphous shadow, a void that consumed all light and sound, yet somehow whispered promises of forbidden knowledge and power. The cult's rituals were desperate attempts to hold this force at bay. Blood sacrifices, incantations in tongues long lost, and carvings designed to bind its essence within the basement's depths. But every century, the seals weakened. Madness and disappearances followed, as the entity stretched its influence beyond the shadows. I realized then, the house wasn't merely haunted. It was a battleground, a prison for a cosmic horror that defied comprehension. The air around me thickened, as if the entity's presence pressed closer. The glyphs on the walls pulsed rhythmically, syncing with a dreadful vibration that resonated deep within my bones. I felt a cold breath against my neck, an invisible weight that whispered my name in a voice that was no voice. Panic surged, yet curiosity chained me to the spot. The book warned that anyone who lingered too long risked being consumed, not just physically, but mentally. The whispering hunger did not merely devour flesh. It devoured sanity, bending minds until they became vessels for its will. I understood now the fate of the previous owners, the disappearances, the strange phenomena. They were the entity's hunger manifesting, reaching through the cracks. A sudden chill raced down my spine as I heard the faintest rustle behind me. Spinning around, I faced nothing but shadows. Yet the oppressive sensation remained, like unseen eyes burning holes into my soul. The cult's final rites, long abandoned, were not enough. The entity was waking. I clenched the book tightly, knowing the basement's dark secrets were far from buried. The house had been waiting for me. The shadows in the cavern thickened and coalesced, twisting into a shape both terrifying and incomprehensible. The air grew electric with malevolent energy, crackling and buzzing around me as the entity emerged from the void. Its form was fluid, ever shifting, a writhing mass of darkness and impossible angles. that defied the natural order. My heart hammered in my chest as I stumbled backward, the ancient tome slipping from my grasp. The ground beneath me trembled, threatening to swallow me whole. The whispering hunger's presence was suffocating, pressing in from all sides, its silent voice filling my mind with promises of eternal knowledge and oblivion. It spoke without words, invading my thoughts with visions of endless voids, cosmic horrors beyond human understanding, and the futility of resistance. I felt my sanity fray, my grip on reality weakening as the entity sought to consume me completely. Desperation surged through me. I forced myself to focus, recalling the cryptic instructions in the book, a ritual of binding and banishment. Gathering what little strength I had, I began to chant the incantations, my voice shaking but determined. The symbols on the walls flared to life, glowing with a fierce blue light that clashed with the entity's darkness. The cavern shook violently as the cosmic battle unfolded. Light and shadow, order and chaos clashing in a deadly dance. The entity lashed out, tendrils of shadow whipping through the air, seeking to envelop me. I dodged and weaved the ritual's power, growing with every word I spoke. Sweat poured down my face as I fought to maintain focus, knowing that failure meant oblivion. Then, with a final, deafening roar, the entity recoiled, its form unraveling into a cloud of darkness that was drawn into the glowing glyphs, which sealed shut like a cosmic prison. Once more, silence fell. I collapsed, breathless and shaking, the weight of what I had faced pressing down on me. But as I looked around, I realized the battle was not over. The house was watching, waiting for the next moment to awaken. I barely made it out of the cavern alive. The air was thick with dust and the lingering echoes of the entity's rage. Every step I took felt heavy, as if the house itself was trying to pull me back into its depths. When I finally reached the basement door, I fumbled with the lock, heart pounding, desperate for freedom. Back in the dim light of the upper floors, I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. The oppressive weight that had clung to me in the basement felt lighter, but a new dread settled deep inside my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still tethered to whatever I had unleashed. As I moved through the empty rooms, something caught my eye, a dusty, leather-bound diary, lying forgotten on a cracked table. I hesitated, but then opened it, curiosity overpowering my fear. The pages were filled with shaky handwriting, dated over a century ago. The author wrote of strange rituals, sightings of shadowy figures, and a growing madness that consumed the family. But what chilled me most was a passage that spoke directly to me, as if the writer had known I would come. The diary revealed a terrifying truth. I was not just an intruder. The house had marked me long ago, part of a lineage tied to the cult and the entity beneath. The family bloodline was cursed to guard this secret, bound by fate to the dark forces they sought to contain. A shiver ran down my spine. If the house had chosen me, what did that mean for my future? Was I doomed to become the next prisoner of the basement? I closed the diary, the weight of the revelation sinking in. The horror wasn't confined to the past. It was alive and waiting. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't run from this. The darkness had found me, and there was no turning back. The house at 1213 isn't just a place. It's a warning. What I've shared here barely scratches the surface of the darkness lurking beneath. The basement is a gateway, a prison, and a trap. And now, by listening, you are a part of this story. If you've felt the weight of this tale pressing in, if the shadows seem longer, or the silence a little louder, know that you're not alone. The horrors we fear are often the ones we cannot see, and some secrets are meant to stay buried. But here's the truth. Knowledge is a double-edged sword. To understand the darkness is to invite it closer. I urge you, be cautious about where your curiosity takes you next. If this story chilled you, if it sparked questions you can't shake, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Your voice might be the key to unraveling more mysteries. And remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that don't end. Stay vigilant. And until next time, keep your lights on and your mind open.